The overhead lights in OR 3 hummed softly, casting a hard white circle over the open abdomen on the table. The air smelled of betadine hot metal and the copper tang of blood. A monitor beeped in a steady rhythm that did not match the tension in the room. Dr. Rachel Carter leaned in her gloved hands, small and sure, inside the cavity. Her eyes tracked each vessel as if she knew them personally. She did not speak. She did not need to. When she tilted her wrist, the scrub nurse passed the next instrument without a word. The patient had come in 20 minutes earlier on a gurney with no name, no ID, just a jagged stab wound and a soaked shirt. Security had called him John Doe and rolled him into her bay because there had been no one else to take him. "Clamp," Rachel said quietly. The nurse placed it in her hand. Rachel's fingers worked precise and unhurried. Blood slowed, then stopped. The monitor steadied. The doors crashed open. They hit the stopper with a hollow bang that made the scrub tech flinch. Dr. Adrian Blake filled the doorway in a white coat and burgundy tie, a tablet tucked under one arm, his badge swinging against his chest. "Who authorized you to open this man?" His voice cut through the room like cold water. The anesthesiologist glanced up, then down again. Nobody answered. Rachel did not look away from the wound. He was hypotensive and unresponsive. Ultrasound showed free fluid. He needed a laparotomy. "I did not ask for your opinion," Adrian said. He stepped closer, looking past her hands, not at them. "You are a first-year attending here. You do not touch an unidentified trauma case without my say-so." "Dr. Carter saved him," the scrub nurse murmured, then stopped when Adrian's eyes flicked to her. Rachel placed a neat suture, her movements calm. He was losing his blood pressure. There was no time to wait. Adrian's mouth twisted. "How long have you even been operating, Dr. Carter?" 15 years, she replied. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. 15, he repeated, a thin smile appearing. "What did you do, practice on mannequins on YouTube?" A few strained chuckles broke around the room, more reflex than humor. The anesthesiologist adjusted a drip just to have something to do. The scrub tech stared down at the metal tray, jaw tight. Rachel tied off the last suture, clipped the thread, and finally looked up. Her gaze did not challenge, it did not apologize. It was simply steady. "Skin closure," she said softly. The nurse moved to comply. Adrian glared at the nameless man on the table, then at Rachel. "We will discuss this when you are out of my operating room." He turned and walked out the door, swinging in his wake. For a moment, only the monitor spoke. Then the room remembered how to breathe. Outside the corridors of St. Matthew Medical Center stretched in long fluorescent lines. Chicago slept and did not sleep beyond the windows, a smear of orange streetlights under a winter sky. Later, in the staff locker room, Rachel peeled off her scrubs. The fabric came away stiff in spots, where blood had dried. A faint white scar curved along the inside of her left wrist. Under the harsh light, it caught the eye before the rest of her did. She dressed in navy blue scrubs and a plain gray hoodie hair twisted back in a quick knot. No jewelry, no extra color. She closed her locker and stepped out. Human Resources occupied a small office near the administrative wing. The walls were painted a color that was not quite beige, not quite gray. A woman with a lanyard and tired eyes flipped through a thin file. "So, Dr. Carter," the woman said, scanning the pages, "graduated from a Midwest med school general surgery residency, then some gaps as contract physician and military service classified." Her tone lifted a little at the last line like a question. Rachel sat with her hands folded, fingers laced together. "Yeah. And we have references from a field hospital in Germany, one stateside VA clinic. No major academic centers, no big fellowships." The woman forced a smile. "St. Matthew is a very competitive place." "I am aware," Rachel said. "Well, Dr. Blake signed off on your credentialing, so here you are." The woman closed the file and shrugged. "You must have impressed him." Rachel thought of the look on Adrian's face in OR3. Something like that. In the weeks that followed, the hospital showed her its teeth. Residents whispered about who had been invited to which research team. Attendings spoke in quick coded sentences in the hallway, choosing allies and protecting territory. In the break room, a news channel played stories of shootings, accidents, sirens that never turned off. Rachel ignored most of it. She took the cases assigned to her. She worked late when others went home. She moved with a focus that made her seem distant. Nurse Mia Nguyen noticed first. Mia watched how Rachel's hands never hovered or searched. They went straight to the right site, the right angle. When a flustered intern dropped a clamp, Rachel caught it before it hit the floor without even looking down. "Where did you really train?" Mia asked her one slow afternoon as they stood by the nurse's station charting. Rachel tapped a note into the electronic record. "Different places." "That file they have on you is missing a few chapters," Mia said. Rachel glanced up, a hint of something passing through her eyes, then gone. "Some chapters are not for HR." Mia wanted to ask more, but a trauma call cut the moment short. It was just past midnight when the ambulance doors burst open. Rain streaked the back window, distorting the red glare of the lights. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, a paramedic called as they rolled the gurney in. No ID, found in an alley. Pressure 80 over palp heart rate 140 on scene. They pushed into Trauma Bay 2. Rachel was already there, gloving up. "Where is Dr. Blake?" an intern asked, voice high. Not answering his pager, a nurse replied, phone pressed to her ear. Blood soaked the sheets under the man's back. His skin had that odd gray tint that meant the body was choosing which organs to keep. Rachel palpated his abdomen, found rigidity, felt the rush of fluid with each heartbeat. "He needs the OR now," she said. "Call for an open room." "We need attending approval," the intern stammered. "Policy says we have to wait for department chief if it is an unidentified trauma." Rachel's jaw set. Policy did not see his blood pressure. She leaned close to the man's ear. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. "You are going to hear a lot of noise, Kitigual," she told him quietly. "Ignore all of it and keep doing the breathing part." He tried a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. Minutes later, in OR 4, the smell of cautery filled the air. The man's blood sprayed once hot against Rachel's gown before she clamped the vessel. Mia stood at her side, now passing instruments, reading her movements as if they were a familiar language. They worked quickly, packed the abdomen, controlled what they could, left what needed a second look for another day. By the time they closed, the monitor had climbed from a drowning rhythm to something that looked almost normal. "Nice catch," Mia said softly as they stripped their gloves. She nodded toward the patient. He walked closer than most. Rachel looked at the man's face, now slack and peaceful under the anesthesia. "It was not his night," she said. The next morning, Rachel was paged to the chief's office. Adrian's door was half glass, half wood. Through the glass, she could see him at his desk, tie straight hair perfectly in place, fingers tight around a pen. "Come in," he said when she knocked. His office looked out over the city. Lake Michigan was a steel line in the distance. On the wall behind him hung framed diplomas from places people liked to mention in conversation. On the desk, a chart lay open. Attached to it was a printout from the trauma log. "You opened a gunshot victim last night without my authorization," Adrian said. "No greeting, no pleasantries." "There was no time to wait," Rachel replied. She stood, hands at her sides. "He was hypotensive, rigid abdomen, clear sign of intra-abdominal bleeding. He is still alive because we did not debate." "You violated protocol." His voice hardened. "We have systems here to prevent chaos. You do not get to decide that your judgment outranks the chain of command." Rachel's gaze dropped to his hands. They were steady now, resting on the desk. On the OR floor they had not always been. "I have worked in places where chaos did not wait for permission," she said quietly. "Where we hung flashlights from tent poles and prayed the generator would hold. We did not have time to ask who was in charge." His eyes narrowed. "You keep bringing up these vague places. Field hospitals, war zones." He flicked at the paper. "Your resume lists rotations and a few vague contracts. Convenient that the impressive parts are classified." "The impressive parts are dead," she said. The room cooled a few degrees. "The ones still alive are not interested in being testimonials." Silence stretched between them. Outside, an ambulance siren rose and fell somewhere in the city. Adrian picked up a folder from the side of his desk and opened it. The top page had her name in bold letters. Beneath it, a typed form lines waiting for signatures. "This is a notice of suspension," he said. "Effective immediately, pending review of your credentials and your conduct." He rotated the folder and slid it toward her. A pen sat neatly on top. Rachel studied the words as if they belonged to someone else. "For saving a patient." "For insubordination," Adrian corrected. She reached for the pen. Her grip was light, precise, the way it was with a needle holder. She signed where the line told her to sign, each letter clean. "You will return your ID badge and access codes before you leave the building," Adrian said. He did not look up as he spoke. Rachel closed the folder and set the pen down. "Is that all, Dr. Blake?" "For now," he said. She walked out without slamming the door. At her locker, she took the few things that were hers. A battered stethoscope, a small notebook with dog-eared corners, a photograph of a blue sky with no faces in it. She placed them carefully into a cardboard box someone had left from a shipment of gloves. When she closed the locker, the metallic click echoed in the empty room. She stepped into the corridor box in her arms. Nurses hurried past, phones ringing on their hips. Interns clustered around a computer, eyes on labs and orders. Through the glass doors at the far end of the hall, the city glowed grim and pale. Somewhere beyond the hospital walls, a siren wailed, rising on the wind, then fading again into the noise of Chicago. Rachel shifted the weight of the box against her chest and started toward the exit. She did not look back. By the time Rachel reached the end of the corridor, the cardboard box had begun to bite into her forearms. The edges dug through the thin cotton of her sleeves. The hospital's air felt cooler out here, touched by drafts from automatic doors that sighed open and shut at the main entrance. Dr. Carter. The voice came from behind her. She stopped and turned. Mia Nguyen jogged up the hall, her ponytail slipping loose under a disposable cap, a half-finished cup of coffee in her hand. Dark circles smudged the skin beneath her eyes, but there was a quickness there that fatigue had not managed to dull. "You are really packing up," Mia said, a little out of breath. Rachel shifted the box. Inside, the stethoscope knocked against the side with a dull clack. "Apparently I am." "You signed it." "There was a line for my name," Rachel said. "I put it there." Mia looked at her for a long moment. The overhead lights reflected in her irises, turning them almost glassy. "He's wrong about you." Rachel glanced toward the sliding doors at the far end of the corridor. Beyond them, she could see the faint impression of the street smeared by tinted glass. Being right about me was not in his job description. Mia opened her mouth, then shut it again. A small muscle worked in her jaw. She took a sip of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. The hospital speakers crackled before either of them could say more. "Attention all clinical staff, mass casualty incident reported, all available personnel to emergency, repeat, mass casualty incident reported, all available personnel to emergency." The announcement rolled down the hallway, bouncing off painted walls and polished floors. A second later, the code siren began to pulse low and insistent in time with the overhead lights that started to flash amber at each intersection. A resident sprinted past them, almost clipping Rachel with his shoulder. Another nurse phoned to her ear, mouthed "explosion" as she hurried by. The air seemed to thicken with movement. Mia turned toward the noise, toward the elevators that would drop her to the emergency department. Her gaze flicked back to the box in Rachel's arms. "You cannot," Mia said. The words came out sharper than she meant. "You know what he will do if he sees you in a room." The box felt suddenly heavy and wrong in Rachel's hands, like a prop she had agreed to carry in someone else's play. Down the hall, a gurney rattled in wheels, complaining on the tile. Someone was shouting vital signs. Someone else was crying. The smell of smoke, faint but distinct, rode in through the automatic doors each time they opened. Rachel stared at the doors a heartbeat longer. Then she set the box down neatly beside a linen cart and straightened. "Mia," she said. "What?" "Where is your spare pair of scrubs?" Mia's mouth tilted despite everything. She thrust her coffee into Rachel's hands and began ripping at the ties of her disposable gown. In the stairwell, the sound of the hospital changed. Above it had been fluorescent hum and distant monitors. Here, as they descended, voices ricocheted off concrete, overlapping urgent. By the time they pushed through the door into the emergency department, the air was thick with antiseptic sweat and the metallic sweetness that always followed blood. Every bay in the ER seemed full. Patients lay on gurneys in the hall and chairs against the wall on the floor where there was space. Some were wrapped in soot-stained blankets. Others clutched limbs pressed against their bodies, bandages blooming red. Multiple victims from an explosion downtown Overqualified. A charged nurse shouted, pointing staff toward open spots. "Reports of structural collapse. We are on divert, but they keep coming anyway." Rachel grabbed a pair of gloves from a wall dispenser and snapped them on. Her world narrowed to the nearest gurney. First was a middle-aged woman, skin ashy, breathing shallowly. The paramedic pushing her gurney rattled off numbers. Chest pain, shortness of breath was inside the building when it went up, maybe through her. Rachel pressed her stethoscope to the woman's chest, listened past the chaos. The breath sounds on the right were faint and far away. "Needle thoracostomy," Rachel said. "Now get me a 14 gauge. The paramedic blinked. "Right here. She does not care what room we are in." Mia appeared at her side with a kit. They moved together, a practiced machine. Alcohol landmarks needle. A hiss of trapped air escaped as the catheter slid home. The woman's next breath came easier. Color crept back into her lips. "Next," Rachel said. A teenage boy sat on another gurney, hands pressed to his abdomen, eyes wide and glassy. Blood seeped between his fingers. When he lowered his hands, she saw the entry wound the way the fabric tented near his flank. She palpated his abdomen. Guarding, consistency like a waterbed, internal bleeding. "Type and cross," she said, voice level. "Send him up to OR2. He is not going to wait well." The boy grabbed at her wrist. His fingers were cold and slick. "Am I going to die?" "Not if you keep your questions short," Rachel answered. She squeezed his hand once hard enough to anchor him. "Give your energy to breathing." He tried to laugh, choked instead. Orderlies wheeled him away. A child came in next, 8 or 9 years old, hair matted with ash. Each breath came with a high-pitched wheeze. Her chest barely moved. "Strida," Mia said, already pulling equipment toward them. Rachel held the girl's chin, looked into eyes that were too big and a face smudged gray. "You are doing fine. We are going to help." She slid the laryngoscope into place, the world shrinking to the illuminated curve of the oropharynx. A moment of resistance, then the vocal cords appeared pale and trembling. The tube went through on the first pass. The wheeze turned into the soft whoosh of air through plastic. Around them, chaos continued. Stretchers collided, monitors beeped their disapproval. The overhead speaker called for more staff who were not there. Dr. Blake is supposed to be coordinating this, Mia muttered as they moved away from the intubated child. Do you see him anywhere? Rachel glanced toward the far end of the department where the glass doors to the ambulance bay opened and shut. No sign of Adrian. He will be here, she said. He arrived 10 minutes later, white coat flaring as he strode in, followed by a knot of administrators. His hair was still perfect. His eyes were not. What is she doing here? He demanded the second he saw Rachel leaning over another patient. The room did not pause this time. There was no space for indignant silence. Working, Mia said without looking up from the line she was placing. Same as the rest of us. Adrian snapped his fingers at a nearby security guard. Get her out of here. She is suspended. The security guard looked between Rachel, who was compressing a lacerated artery with both hands, and Adrian, whose voice was climbing with each word. He hesitated. Before he could decide, another gurney shot through the doors. This one had 3 paramedics around it instead of 2. An oxygen bag pumped rhythmically at the head. The man on the stretcher wore torn tactical pants and a dark shirt ripped open to expose dressing soaked through. His hair was clipped close, his forearms roped with muscle. Male 30s, the lead paramedic called. Blast injuries, probable penetrating trauma to the abdomen, found near the epicenter. Federal identification. He is priority 1. The words rippled through the nearest cluster of staff. Take him to OR1, Adrian said, already moving after the gurney. I will handle this. Rachel watched the man's face as they rushed past. Even under the oxygen mask, there was something about the set of his jaw, the scars that marked his knuckles, that spoke of a life spent walking toward danger instead of away from it. For a heartbeat, she saw not a hospital corridor, but the inside of a helicopter, red lights flashing over bodies strapped to stretchers. Rotor wash had smelled like hot sand back then. Dr. Carter, Mia said. Rachel blinked and the ER returned to Mia. Mia nodded toward the patients that still filled the bays. We have plenty of work that is not priority 1. They bent back over their tasks. Upstairs, the lights in OR1 were the same harsh white as every other operating room in St. Matthew. They made no allowance for the difference in what lay on the table. Adrian stood scrubbed and gowned, hands held out in front of him as the circulating nurse tied his back. His jaw was set so tight that the muscles jumped. Let us open, he said. The first incision went well enough. The skin parted, then the fat, then the fascia. Once he entered the abdomen, the illusion of control ended. Blood pooled in the wound faster than suction could clear it. Shards of metal glinted among shredded tissue. The smell grew heavier, almost sweet, as if the air itself were thickening. Suction, Adrian snapped. Retract. I cannot see. The scrub tech moved hands quick, but the field did not clear. Somewhere under that red, a major vessel was leaking life onto the table. The anesthesiologist called out numbers from behind the drape. Pressure dropping, heart rate 150, we are losing him. Adrian chased one possible source, then another, clamping, releasing, clamping again. Each move dug him deeper into confusion. His glove slipped once on slick tissue. His hand jerked. For a second, the suction wand grazed the pulsation of the aorta. Everyone in the room froze. Careful, the anesthesiologist hissed. Adrian's breathing turned shallow. A fine tremor began at his wrist and crept up his arm. I need more light, he said. The lights were already as bright as they could go. The monitor alarm shifted pitch, turning shrill. The green line danced faster, then shorter. The blood pressure numbers crawled downward. Behind the glass of the observation window, a small knot of staff had gathered. Word of a priority 1 case traveled fast. Faces pressed, close eyes fixed on the man who should not be dying, but was. Among them, Mia stood with her arms wrapped around herself. At her side, Rachel watched the scene unfold below. She saw the pattern in the bleeding, the way it flooded one quadrant more than the others. She saw where Adrian kept looking and where he did not. She knew from the tilt of his shoulders that he was guessing now. He is searching in the wrong place, Mia said under her breath. Rachel's fingertips pushed into the metal railing until her knuckles blanched. The glass reflected her face back at her, pale in the harsh light eyes dark. Where? Mia asked. Rachel. The injury is in the mesentery, Rachel said. He is chasing ghosts near the aorta while the real leak is lower. Then tell him. He will not listen. Then do something else. The monitor down below emitted a long continuous tone before settling back into jagged peaks. The anesthesiologist's voice cut through. We are at 60, systolic and dropping. If we do not get control of this in the next 2 minutes, he is gone. Adrian looked up, eyes searching the observation window as if salvation might be staring back at him. It was. Rachel was already moving. She hit the stairs at a run, Mia right behind her. The swing door into OR1 bumped hard against the stopper when she pushed through. "Get out," Adrian said without looking, assuming it was another nurse. Carter, the scrub tech, breathed instead. Rachel stepped to the edge of the field, hands held away from her body, fingers spread. 3-centimeter window in the left lower quadrant, she said, voice steady. Clamp the mesenteric branch, stop digging near the aorta. Adrian finally looked at her. His eyes were wild pupils pinpoints in the glare. "You are suspended," he said. "You have no authority to be here." "You have no control of his bleeding," Rachel answered. "We can debate authority on another day." The anesthesiologist glanced between them, then at the monitor. "We do not have another day." For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Adrian stepped back from the table. His shoulders sagged half an inch. It was enough. "Fine, say them fine," he said. The word was barely audible behind his mask. Rachel turned to the scrub tech. New gown, new gloves. They moved fast. Blue paper ties pulled tight latex, snapping at her wrists. When she stepped up to the field, the blood smell wrapped around her like an old coat. The anatomy of a torn abdomen under blast conditions was not new to her. It was the same story written in different handwriting. She followed the flow, not the chaos. "Retract here," she said. "Suction there. Do not touch this plane." Her hands moved with an economy that made time stretch. She found the leaking branch, compressed it with her fingers, felt the pulse diminish. "Clamp," she said. The clamp fit where her fingers had been. She tied off the vessel, then checked the rest of the field, her eyes sweeping for hidden betrayals. Slowly, the red pool on the table stopped widening. The suction cannula began to pull more thin fluid than thick. The monitor responded. The numbers on the screen inched upward. The green tracing stretched into longer, more confident strides. 12 minutes after she stepped into the room, the worst of it was over. The abdomen was not pristine and never would be, but it was no longer a battlefield. "He needs ICU and wide-spectrum antibiotics," Rachel said, stepping away from the table. Her voice sounded far away to her own ears. "Watch for sepsis, compartment issues, delayed bleeds." She peeled off her gloves. Her hands underneath were creased and damp, faint indentations from the latex running over the bones of her knuckles. Before anyone could say anything else, the doors opened again. This time, 3 people entered wearing dark suits instead of scrubs. Their shoes were dry and polished, untouched by the mess of the floor. Each carried a slim leather wallet in one hand. The man in front flipped his open just enough for the seal to catch the light. "Dr. Rachel Carter," he said. She turned surgical cap, still in place, mask, hanging loose around her neck. Blood speckled her gown in dark brown constellations. "Yes," she said. "We are with Federal Tactical Intelligence," he said. "We need you to come with us. It is a matter of national security." No one spoke. Even the machines seemed to quiet themselves. Adrian stared between the man's badge and Rachel's face. The gap between what he thought he knew and what he was seeing stretched wide and thin inside him. Rachel glanced once at the patient on the table, then at Mia, who stood near the supply cabinet, eyes wide above her mask. Mia gave the smallest nod. Rachel untied her gown, let it slide off her shoulders and into the waiting hands of the circulating nurse. Underneath, her scrubs were soaked at the forearms. "All right," she said. She followed the agents out of the operating room, leaving behind the smell of blood, the glare of the lights, and the echo of alarms that would not stop just because she had passed through another set of doors. The corridor outside the operating room felt colder than it had going in. Strips of light ran along the ceiling, humming over polished floors. The 3 men in suits walked a step ahead of Rachel, their pace clipped and precise like they were moving on rails. "Do you need a moment to change, doctor?" the lead agent asked without slowing. Rachel glanced down at herself. Her scrubs were stiff with drying blood. Someone else's, not hers. "No," she said. "If there is time for that, there is time for another surgeon." He gave the smallest nod as if that was the answer he expected. At the service elevator, the doors slid shut behind them. The agent pressed a keycard to a hidden panel, then hit a button at the bottom of the column. The car began to descend deeper than the parking levels. "Name is Carter, correct?" the agent behind her said. "That is what they call me," she replied. The man in front smiled faintly at the closed doors. "I am Agent Lewis. This is Agent Ruiz and Agent Kwan. We are with Federal Tactical Intelligence." "That is what you told the chief of surgery," Rachel said. "You did not tell him why." Lewis's eyes met hers in the reflection on the steel doors. "We have an operative in critical condition. We have neurosurgeons. We do not have you." The elevator chimed and opened into an underground corridor she had not known existed beneath St. Matthew. The air here smelled different, less of disinfectant and more of sealed concrete and machine oil. They walked past a pair of armed security officers who took in Rachel's bloody scrubs with a flick of their eyes and nothing more. A black SUV waited in a loading bay. The back door stood open like a mouth. Rachel climbed in. The leather seats creaked under her weight. Lewis slid in beside her, Ruiz and Quan taking the front. They pulled out into the night. Chicago moved past the tinted windows in streaks of light and shadow. Sirens flared somewhere in the distance, different from the hospital alarms, yet made of the same notes. Streetlights painted the wet pavement in bands of gold. Explosion downtown, Ruiz said from the front, watching traffic part for them. Office building lower floors, still getting information. Rachel rested her forearms on her knees. The dried blood cracked in thin lines when she shifted. How many? She asked. Too many, Lewis said quietly. They drove without the radio on. No one tried to fill the silence. The SUV left the main arteries of the city, slipping into narrower streets that looked like service roads. They passed under a rusted rail bridge, then into a tunnel where lights were spaced farther apart. At the far end, a reinforced gate opened on command of their headlights. The vehicle rolled through into an underground garage that could have been any government facility if not for the level of security. Cameras tracked them, small red lights blinking. "Welcome to FTI Chicago Operations," Quan said as they parked. Inside the building was all sharp lines and muted colors. The floors were too clean to have seen many gurneys. Rachel's shoes left faint prints as she walked. They brought her through a series of checkpoints that asked for badges she did not have. Each time an agent presented credentials. Each time the door opened. Finally, a set of double-glass doors parted to reveal a room that looked like the inside of a television news story. Wall-mounted screens showed maps, satellite images, scrolling lines of text. A central cluster of desks held computers, coffee cups, and people in shirt sleeves speaking into headsets. In the middle stood a man with silver hair and a posture that suggested he had once worn a uniform and never quite stopped. He turned as they approached. "Dr. Carter," he said. His voice held recognition. "It has been a while." Rachel stopped a few feet away. Under the bright monitors, the lines at the corners of his eyes were more visible than she remembered. "Director Morgan," she said, "I see you found another windowless room." Caleb Morgan smiled, and for a moment the command center felt less like a machine. "Some of us take comfort in familiar things." He gestured toward a side door. "Walk with me." The briefing room was smaller, quieter. One wall was taken up entirely by a screen showing a CT scan in grays and whites. A spine arched across it like a pale bridge. Near the middle, at the level of the mid-back, small bright specks glowed where they should not. Caleb followed her gaze. "That is Agent Ethan Ward," he said. "Field operative, 12 years on the ground. He was running an extraction in East Africa 2 weeks ago. Took 2 rounds from an old rifle that should have been in a museum." He tapped a control. The image shifted, highlighting the area around the thoracic vertebrae. One bullet grazed the lung. Our people patched that. The second fragmented. Pieces lodged here near T7, millimeters from the spinal cord. Rachel stepped closer. The segments flickered as the projection moved through slices of tissue. She traced the path without touching the screen. "Who operated the first time?" she asked. "Local surgeons under our supervision, Caleb Caleb said. "It was a stopgap. We stabilized what we could. We did not have the tools there to do this part." "How long has he been like this?" "Too long," Caleb said. "We flew him in as soon as he was cleared for transport. Then the explosion happened. His condition has deteriorated. If we do not remove those fragments soon, he loses his legs at best. At worst, he does not make it off the table." "Your neurosurgeons are not confident," Rachel said. "They are very confident that the margin for error is smaller than their experience," Caleb answered. "We ran through the names. Only 3 surgeons in the country have done this under comparable conditions." He looked at her, not at the scan, and 2 of them are retired. She let the implication settle. Her fingers curled loosely at her sides. "You have done this before," he continued. "Kandahar, Mosul. Old names, old heat. Another tent, another generator, another man on a table asking, with his eyes, if he would still walk when the morphine wore off. Underfoot the tile felt more solid than packed earth ever had. "What is his neurostatus now?" she asked. "Weakness in both legs," Caleb said, increasing. "Pain in the thoracic region, intermittent loss of bladder control. The window is closing." Rachel studied the scan one more time. "I will need a team," she said. "You can pick anyone," Caleb replied. "Ours, yours, a mix." "My scrub nurse is Mia Nguyen," Rachel said. "St. Matthew, I want her." Caleb nodded. "Done." Rachel hesitated, then added, "And I want another surgeon." "We have people," Caleb said, "spine specialist, vascular." "I know," Rachel said. "Bring me Dr. Adrian Blake." Caleb's brows lifted. "The same Dr. Blake who suspended you this morning." "He is skilled when he is not trying to protect his title," Rachel said. "He knows the hospital, he knows the pressure. I will need another pair of hands that can take instructions." Caleb studied her face. "Is this about giving him a chance or about taking his away?" It is about not wasting good hands, she answered. He accepted that and turned to Lewis, who had been standing against the wall like part of the furniture. Get them both, quietly. Lewis nodded and left. Caleb gave Rachel a long look. You have not slept, he said. Not properly in about 15 years, Maya, she said. Do you have a place I can scrub and change? He pointed her toward a door on the other side of the room. There is a locker room through there, he said. We will have new scrubs waiting. We already have your size on file. She paused at the doorway. Of course you do. Mia was halfway through documenting a chart when two men in suits stepped up to the nurse's station. She did not look up at first. The words on the screen were swimming slightly. Excuse me, Nurse Nguyen, one of them said. The formal tone made her lift her head. They showed her badges fast enough that she saw Federal and Intelligence without catching all the letters in between. Is there a problem with one of my patients? She asked. No, the taller one said. We have been asked to bring you in to assist with a procedure. At this hour, she said. Here. Not here, he replied. You will be returned when we are done. Mia's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. Is Dr. Carter involved in this? The men exchanged a glance that was answer enough. In his office, Adrian sat alone with the suspension folder open in front of him. Rachel's neat signature stared back from the bottom of the page. He had read it twice already, as if something in the curve of the letters might offer an alternate explanation. The knock on his door was sharp. We are closed, he said, not looking up. The door opened anyway. Two strangers stepped inside suits, crisp expressions neutral. Dr. Blake, the one nearest asked. Adrian stood out of habit. Yes. If this is about the mass casualty event, I am in the middle of coordinating debriefs. This is not a great time. We will not take long, the agent said. Director Morgan of Federal Tactical Intelligence has requested your assistance on an urgent case. Adrian stared. There must be a mistake. There is not, the man said. You have 10 minutes to gather anything you need. Adrian glanced at the window. The city looked the same as it had an hour ago, but his office did not. The folder on his desk seemed suddenly small. Federal Tactical what? He asked. You will be briefed on site, the agent said. Doctor, we do not have time to argue. 10 minutes later, Adrian rode in silence in the back of another black SUV, his mind flipping through possibilities that did not quite land. They arrived at FTI within minutes of each other. Mia and Adrian funneled through the same security checks that had admitted Rachel. Guards searched bags with efficiency that did not invite conversation. Mia spotted Rachel first. She stood outside a glass wall looking in. She had changed into fresh scrubs FTI green instead of hospital blue. Her hair was tucked into a surgical cap that hid the color but not the shape. When Rachel turned at the sound of approaching footsteps, Mia saw the lines of fatigue more clearly. They were not new. You brought me to the superhero base, Mia said, stopping beside her. Something like that, Rachel replied. Thank you for coming. I did not exactly get a choice, Mia said. Then more quietly, you look like you need me. I do, Rachel said. Adrian stepped up a beat later, still buttoning the cuff of a sterile jacket someone had given him. What is this place? He began, then stopped when he took in the scan on the screen inside the briefing room. His gaze snapped to Rachel. You knew about this, he said. Oh, yeah, he said. It was not an accusation so much as a last attempt to organize the chaos. I know about the part they want me to fix, Rachel said. A woman in uniform entered the briefing room from a side door. Her hair was pulled tight at the nape of her neck, streaks of gray at the temples. Silver eagle pins glinted on her shoulders. When she saw Rachel, she came to attention with an easy snap of her heels and saluted. Dr. Carter, she said, it is good to see you again. Rachel returned the gesture with a smaller, more personal version. Colonel Brooks? Mia glanced at Adrian. He looked like someone had pulled the floor half an inch out from under him. Caleb joined them, nodding at Elena Brooks. Colonel Brooks has come up from the Pentagon to assist with this, he said for Mia and Adrian's benefit. Elena turned to face them. For those who have not had the pleasure, she said, Dr. Rachel Carter served as lead combat surgeon attached to multiple special operations units in Afghanistan and Iraq. She ran forward surgical teams under fire with minimal supplies, often without power. Her call sign in the field was Ghost Hands. She glanced briefly at Rachel, then continued. She is one of a handful of surgeons in the world who have successfully removed ballistic fragments from the thoracic spine under combat conditions without leaving the patient paralyzed. That is why you are here. Mia's throat went dry. She looked at Rachel as if seeing her for the first time. Adrian found a chair without meaning to and sat. His hand landed on the table beside the printed scan, fingers splayed. Why is none of that in your file? He said more to himself than anyone else. Because her record is largely classified, Caleb said. You are seeing more than most. The briefing moved on, but something fundamental in the room had shifted. When they spoke about Agent Ethan Ward now, they did so, knowing that the calm woman in green scrubs had already walked this kind of cliff. In the operating suite FTI had prepared, the lights were as bright as any hospital, but the equipment was a shade more advanced. Monitoring systems whispered updates in soft tones. The air smelled of iodine and cold metal. Through the glass, Rachel watched Ethan Ward as the anesthesiologist settled him. He looked less dangerous lying on the table, hospital gown tied at the back hairline marked by tape and leads. The hard edges remained, though, in the set of his jaw and the scars mapped across his arms. Mia stood beside Rachel tying her mask. "Any last-minute pep talks?" Mia asked. "Remember to breathe," Rachel said. "I was going to say that to you," Mia replied. Inside the scrub room, water ran hot over Rachel's hands. She brushed each finger methodically the way she had been taught long before her first deployment. The habit had become ritual then, something almost like prayer. She caught her reflection in the small mirror above the sink. For a second, the fluorescent light picked up the faint white line on her wrist where shrapnel had once kissed skin. She turned away, shook off the excess water, and reached for a sterile towel. Minutes later, they stepped into the operating room together. "Good morning," Rachel said to the team, though it was closer to midnight. "Let us keep this organized." Mia took her place at Rachel's right. Adrian stood opposite, adjusting his headlamp. He avoided Rachel's eyes, then forced himself to meet them. "If I get in your way, Ose," he said quietly, "tell me. Do not hesitate." "I will not," she said. The anesthesiologist called out baseline vitals. "Blood pressure 120/70, heart rate 80, oxygenation is good." "All right," Rachel said. "We begin." They did not rush. There was no elegance in a hurried cut. She opened layer by layer, exposing muscle, then bone. The hum of the fluoroscopy unit filled the spaces between voices. She directed the placement of retractors, the angle of the surgical microscope. Under magnification, the field turned into a landscape of white and pink, with the darker river of the spinal canal at its center. "There," Mia said softly as the smallest pieces of metal came into view, shards irregular nestled where no foreign body should be. Rachel inhaled slowly, letting her chest rise and fall beneath the gown. "First fragment lateral to the cord," she said. "Minimal adhesion. We will take that one to start." Adrian passed her the microforceps without being asked. His hand brushed hers, and she felt the tremor that had not quite left him. She anchored the instrument with her own steadiness. She gripped the edge of the fragment, lifting just enough to free it from fibrous tissue, then drew it out along the path it had taken going in. It slid from the field and dropped into a stainless steel basin with a tiny, satisfying click. "One," Mia said, marking it. The next piece was smaller and closer. Hear the cord pulse gently with each heartbeat. The wrong angle would bruise it, tear it, end the operation in a very different way. The room quieted even further. Even the circulating nurse seemed to move more softly. Rachel spoke less and less, and when she did, it was only in single words. "Retract. Hold. Now." 3 hours into the case, a cramp began in her shoulder. She shifted her stance just enough to relieve it without changing the line of her instruments. Adrian felt sweat slide down between his shoulder blades. He focused on whatever Rachel told him to focus on, his world reduced to a small space lit in white. "There is one more," Rachel said at last, "the dangerous one." On the screen, the final fragment gleamed embedded almost against the cord itself. It looked like nothing much at all, a speck of metal hardly worth notice. "Nobody moves until I say," she added. Her breath slowed. She heard her own heartbeat steady and measured, matching the steady blip on the monitor. Her fingers settled around the forceps as if they had grown there. She slid the tip in beside the fragment, not pulling, only testing the give of the tissue. The room leaned in without meaning to. A drop of sweat rolled down the bridge of Adrian's nose. It hung at the tip a second too long. Mia saw it reached with a sterile gauze, caught it before it could fall. "Got you," she whispered, more to the moment than to him. Rachel lifted. The fragment came free with a tear that was more sensation than sound, a small release of pressure. She extracted it in one smooth motion and held it up for a second, the tiny blood-streaked shard captured in the jaws of the instrument. "Last one," Mia said, exhaling. The monitors did not scream. The tracing held. Ethan's body lay as it had an hour before, no worse, and finally possibly better. Rachel placed the fragment into the basin with its brothers. The sound it made was barely audible, but everyone in the room heard it. Closure took time, but not thought. Muscle, fascia, skin. Layers remade in a rough echo of their former self. When at last she stepped back, her shoulders ached and her eyes burned. She did not rub them. She looked at the anesthesiologist instead. "How is he?" she asked. "Stable," he said, holding steady. Caleb watched from the observation window. He had not moved much during the 4 hours his hands linked loosely in front of him. When the final suture went in, he let his shoulders relax. In the debrief room afterward, the coffee was strong and terrible. Mia drank hers anyway, hands wrapped around the paper cup for warmth. Adrian sat at the table looking at the large monitor mounted on the far wall. It showed a condensed version of a personnel file, lines of text, interspersed with grainy photos from places most people only saw on the news. 57 documented combat surgeries, he read aloud. 0 elective casualties. Silver Star, Purple Heart, Presidential Unit Citation. He swallowed. His voice did not quite clear. You read that as if it belongs to someone else, he said to Rachel. She sat across from him, posture loose for the first time in hours. Her hair was damp at the edges where Scrub Cap had pressed it. It does, she said. That is a version of me who slept in tents and learned to ignore mortar fire. You did not think any of this was relevant when you applied to my department, he said. I thought it was the only thing any of you would see, she said. I did not want to be your war story. I wanted to hold a pager and complain about cafeteria coffee like everyone else. Mia smiled around the rim of her cup. You do complain about the coffee, she said. Not enough to blend in, Rachel said. Caleb stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He carried a folder in one hand, different from the ones he had shown before. Agent Ward is in recovery, Siku, he said. We will not know the full result for some time, but the initial exam is promising. Mia let out a breath she had been holding. Caleb looked at Rachel. There is something else you should know, he said. He placed the folder on the table and slid it toward her. A photograph paper clipped to the front showed the face of the man Rachel had taken to the operating room from Trauma Bay 2 at St. Matthew. Cleaner alert, wearing a collared shirt instead of a blood-soaked T-shirt, but undeniably the same man. You remember this patient, Caleb said. Rachel touched the corner of the photo with one fingertip. He did not tell me his name, she said. That is because he could not, Caleb replied. You had him intubated in under 5 minutes. He tapped the name printed beneath the photo. Agent Daniel Ross, he said. Partner to Ethan Ward. You saved him 3 days ago. Now you have saved his partner too. Rachel stared at the two names together. The timing settled over her neat as a suture. I did not know who he was, she said. You did not need to, Kauiu, Caleb said. You saw what he needed and did your work. She set the folder down gently. Her hands were steady. Morning bled into afternoon at St. Matthew without much notice. The hospital always smelled the same, like someone had tried to bury metal and fear under lemon cleaner. Rachel walked through the main lobby in street clothes, a plain jacket over a t-shirt, hair loose around her face. People passed her without looking twice. Volunteers wheeled patients toward the revolving door. A television mounted near the gift shop ran a news segment on mute, a red banner scrolling across the bottom. She caught her own name in the captions before she saw her photo. Suspended surgeon, linked to secret federal operation. The image on the screen was lifted from her hospital badge. It did not belong up there. Mia appeared at her elbow, a to-go coffee in one hand, an extra one in the other. Her hair was frizzed from a long shift. Her scrubs had a faint line of dried blood near one knee. You saw it, she said, following Rachel's gaze. Hard to miss, Rachel replied. They have been looping it all morning, Mia said. Someone leaked enough for them to guess the rest. Across the lobby, a small cluster of reporters waited near the entrance, cameras held idle for now. One of them spotted Rachel and raised his hand, but a security guard stepped in with a shake of his head. Hospital policy held at least at the door. Administration is in crisis mode, Mia said. They had an emergency board meeting. You were the main agenda item without being in the room. Rachel accepted the coffee. It was hot and bitter, exactly the way she preferred it when she was not tasting it. Where is Dr. Blake? She asked. Being roasted, Mia said. They called him in an hour ago. Boardroom windows looked over the same city as the surgical offices, but from a higher floor. The table was polished wood, the chairs ergonomic and expensive. Adrian sat near the end, not at the head, his white coat folded over the back of his chair like a shed skin. On the screen at the far wall, a paused news clip showed Rachel's badge photo beside grainy footage from some overseas embed. A blurred figure in scrubs was bent over a stretcher in a canvas tent. This hospital suspended a decorated combat surgeon on the same day a federal agency pulled her into an operation, one board member said, reading from a printout. We are already fielding calls from donors. Adrian kept his hands flat on the table so they would not curl into fists. Her record was not available to me, he said. Her file was incomplete. You had enough to know she was competent, another board member replied. Her outcomes, her performance here. You saw her operate yesterday, added the chief medical officer. She saved a federal agent under your roof while you stood there and watched. The words hit with more force than if they had been shouted. Adrian blinked. I am aware of what she did, he said. Are you aware of what you did? The first board member asked. You signed her suspension. The folder lay on the table between them, Rachel's name on the tab. It looked worn already, like something handled too many times. I know exactly what I signed, Adrian said. His voice came out flatter than he intended. If you are asking for my resignation, you will have it on your desk by the end of the day. The room went quiet. The chair at the head of the table, an older woman with steel gray hair and a cardigan over her blouse, regarded him for a long moment. That would be easy, she said. He frowned. Excuse me. Walking away is easy, she repeated. You put your name on that suspension. You created a culture here where paper mattered more than performance. You do not get to step off the stage because it feels uncomfortable now. He swallowed. What are you suggesting? We want you to stay, she said. We want you to fix what you helped build, starting with how we handle emergency authority in this hospital. He stared. The idea of staying sat in his chest like a stone. You think anyone will trust me after this, he said. Then you will have to earn it, she replied. But first you're going to stand up in front of your peers and tell them exactly where you went wrong. Word of the new protocol spread faster than the memos that described it. Some called it a guideline, others a shield. The formal name was long enough to satisfy bureaucrats. Everyone else shortened it in their heads. Carter Protocol. The auditorium where Adrian spoke was bigger than the boardroom, but it felt smaller. 100 physicians filled the seats, some from St. Matthew, others visiting from across the city. A few looked bored, a few curious. Most carried a guarded skepticism, the default expression of people accustomed to being lectured. Adrian stood at the podium in a plain suit. He had left his white coat in his office. Behind him, a projection screen showed a title slide with his name and the hospital logo. No photos, no dramatic fonts. When I finished residency, he began, I believed that experience could be measured by the names on a diploma and the number of acronyms after a title. The microphone made his voice sound farther away than it was. I believe that if someone did not come from the same place as I did, if their path did not look familiar on paper, then their skill must be less. He looked down at his hands gripping the podium. They were not shaking. That almost disappointed him. I am here today because that belief nearly killed people, he said. A murmur ran through the crowd, then settled. He talked about the unknown trauma patient, about ignoring the evidence of survival in favor of the comfort of hierarchy. He described telling a surgeon with 15 years of work in places he had never seen that she had no right to open a chest without his signature. When he mentioned Rachel by name, the auditorium drew a breath together. Dr. Rachel Carter saved more lives in a tent under mortar fire than I have in all my years at St. Matthew, he said. I suspended her because her resume did not fit my narrow idea of excellence. He did not dress it up. He did not add excuses. There were none that mattered. The Carter Protocol is not about glorifying a single doctor, he went on. It is a simple recognition that in a life-threatening emergency, the person at the bedside has to be empowered to act. We cannot keep building systems that punish decisive care and reward delay. He laid out the points as they had been drafted. Any board-certified attending in a critical situation could initiate life-saving interventions without prior approval if specific criteria were met. Documentation and review would follow, but action would not be held hostage to signatures. When he finished, the room was quieter than when he had started. Then slowly people began to clap. It was not the thunderous approval of a triumphant talk. It was a measured, thoughtful acknowledgement. Afterward, a few colleagues approached him. Some offered brief words. Some simply nodded and moved on. He accepted each interaction like a weight he had earned. Rachel did not attend. She read the transcript later, sitting on a bench outside the emergency department with a paper copy Mia had printed for her. They named it after you, Mia said, dropping onto the bench beside her. You are an adjective now. Rachel smiled faintly. That is always the dream. Mia nudged her shoulder. You know what I mean. Protocols need names, Rachel said. It could have been Blake Protocol. That would have made a different headline. Administration wants more than headlines, Mia said. They are looking for theater. Rachel folded the pages and slipped them back into the manila envelope. The corners were already softening in her hands. Speaking of theater, Mia added, they asked me to find you. For what? Rachel said. The chief medical officer wants to see you, Mia replied. It sounded important. The office they summoned her to was not Adrian's. It belonged to the chief medical officer, framed by windows and degrees, in a potted plant that had somehow stayed alive. The CMO stood as Rachel entered. Dr. Carter, he said. Thank you for coming in. Of course, she replied. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. An envelope lay on the blotter between them, heavier than the one that had held her suspension. I imagine you have had an interesting week, he said. That is one word for it, she said. He smiled thinly and pushed the envelope toward her. The board has formally rescinded your suspension, VA, he said. There will be a public statement to that effect. They have also approved a new position which we would like to offer you. She did not touch the envelope yet. What position? Director of Emergency Medicine, he said. You would oversee the department's supervised protocols, coordinate with administration on policy. It comes with a salary adjustment, of course, and staff. The words slid across the desk like another set of instruments, clean and polished. "You want me at a desk," she said. "We want you where you can do the most good," he replied. "You have already changed how this hospital thinks about emergency care. In that role, you could shape it more." She finally picked up the envelope. It felt dense. Inside, she knew there would be a formal offer, perhaps a contract, maybe a letter drafted by someone in legal. "May I have time to consider?" she asked. "Take a few days," he said. "We would like an answer soon. There is momentum now. It would be a shame to lose it." The hospital chapel sat off a side corridor on the first floor, tucked between radiology and a conference room. If you did not know to look for it, you could walk past and never notice the small sign. Rachel stepped inside with the envelope still in her hand. The space was simple. Wooden pews, a few stained glass windows that caught the light in narrow beams, a row of battery-powered candles flickering under a ledge. The air was cooler here, quieter, as if the walls had decided not to carry sound so far. She sat near the back. The envelope stared up at her from her lap, ivory against denim. She did not open it. Mia found her there 10 minutes later. She slipped into the pew without a word. For a while they just sat listening to the distant hum of the hospital through the closed doors. "They offered you something big, did they not?" Mia said at last. "Director of Emergency Medicine," Rachel replied. "Apparently I have strong leadership potential." "You do," Mia said. "I have strong feelings about ventilator settings," Rachel said. "That is not the same thing." "You could fix things," Mia said, turning to look at her. "From the inside, you already changed one protocol. Imagine what you could do with a title." Rachel studied the stained glass at the front, the way colored light spilled onto the floor. The window depicted no particular scene, just abstract swirls of blue and gold. "In Helmand," she said quietly, "a soldier grabbed my wrist once while I was putting in a chest tube. He asked me if I was any good." Mia waited. "He was not asking about my rank," Rachel continued. "He did not care what I was called. He just wanted to know if he could trust my hands." She flexed her fingers around the envelope. The paper made a soft crackle. "I came here because I thought a normal hospital would be somewhere I could just use my hands," she said, "not sit in meetings about elevator maintenance." "They are offering you recognition they should have given you from the start," Mia said. "Does that not mean anything?" "It means they noticed," Rachel said. "It does not change what I want my days to look like." Mia leaned back against the pew, exhaling through her nose. "So what do you want them to look like?" Rachel let the question hover between them. Somewhere above a floor buffer whirred along a hallway. Distantly, a monitor alarm chirped, then was silenced. "I want to walk into a room where someone is dying," she said, "and not have to ask permission to do what needs to be done." "You can do that without a title," Mia said. "Exactly," Rachel replied. She set the envelope down on the pew beside her, unopened. The light shifted across the floor as a cloud passed over the sun. The colors on the tiles moved but remained. In the corridor outside, a pager went off on someone's belt, shrill and insistent. Mia heard it through the chapel door and felt her body respond, ready to move. Rachel heard it too. Her hand twitched toward a pocket that did not carry a pager anymore. They sat 1 minute longer, then Rachel stood. "I should go tell them," she said. "You are saying no?" Mia asked. "I'm saying I will be in the emergency department," Rachel said. "If they need a director, they can find someone who wants to be at a desk." Mia watched her reach for the door handle. "You are really going back to the floor like nothing happened," Mia said. Rachel paused, hand on the wood. "Nothing about this is nothing," she said. "But there is still a waiting room full of people who do not care what my title is." She opened the door and stepped back into the fluorescent light. For a while, life at St. Matthew rearranged itself around the same hallways in different eyes. Some people watched Rachel when she walked into a room as if expecting something extraordinary to happen every time she picked up a scalpel. Others avoided her gaze, guilt written in the way they stared too long at clipboards. She took call, she ran codes, she scrubbed in, scrubbed out, and signed her notes. The emergency department hummed the way it always had, full of broken bones, broken hearts, and the ordinary violence of a big city. On the worst nights when the trauma bay filled and the overhead speaker did not get a chance to rest, she moved from stretcher to stretcher with the same quiet focus that had carried her through tents and sandstorms. The new protocol lived in the background, now tucked into charts and policies, but she did not think about it when she worked. It was there in the fact that no one asked her to wait. Time passed. Seasons shifted outside the glass walls. The lake froze and thawed and froze again. 3 years later, the smell of hay and engine oil replaced the tang of hospital disinfectant. The training center sat off a 2-lane highway an hour outside the city. The building had been a barn once. Someone had sanded the wood and poured a concrete floor. The big sliding door now held a painted sign that read "Frontline Med" in block letters with smaller words underneath. trauma readiness, and field care. Inside, the air held dust and the sharp scent of coffee in a dented metal air. Folding chairs formed a crooked semicircle around a row of plastic torsos and rubber limbs laid out on tables. The windows were open just enough to let in the sound of crickets from the fields. "All right," Rachel said to the 15 people scattered around the room. "Today we are going to talk about bleeding." Her voice carried easily in the converted space. She wore jeans and a dark t-shirt, a faded hoodie pushed up to her elbows. A small patch was sewn near her shoulder, a white outline of a hand on a gray background. Most of the students did not notice it. They were firefighters, in their station t-shirts, a school nurse with a notepad, already open a truck driver whose kid had convinced him to sign up 2 college students in athletic shoes. A volunteer from the next town over sat in the back hat in his lap. Rachel picked up a tourniquet from the table and held it up. "When someone is bleeding fast, you are not going to remember product names," she said. "You are going to see red and a person who is more quiet than they should be." A few people smiled, then sobered. She walked to the nearest dummy limb, a pale foam leg with a deep red groove where a wound would be. "You are going to think about where your hands go first," she said. "You find the source, you go. Above it, you tighten until you cannot tighten anymore. It hurts. That means it is working." She wrapped the tourniquet high on the foam thigh, turned the rod until the fake tissue pressed in. "You are not trying to be gentle," she added. "You are trying to give them enough time to be gentle later." When she offered the tourniquet to the group, a young firefighter stepped forward. His hands were broad and careful. He copied her motions, slower, concentrating. "Again," she said. "Faster." He shrugged reset and did it again. The second time was better. In the back row, the school nurse raised her hand. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she asked. "My arms get tired if I hold grocery bags too long." Rachel nodded. "Then you use your body," she she said. "You lean into it. You use your shoulders, not just your forearms." She stepped closer, showed how to brace the strap against her own hip, how to gain leverage. The nurse tried it, surprise flickering across her face when the strap cinched tight without as much effort. "You will be surprised what you can do when you have to," Rachel said. The morning moved on in a rhythm of demonstration and practice. They applied pressure dressings. They learned to roll a person without twisting the spine. They listened to her explain how to talk to someone who was staring at their own wound as if it belonged to another body. Between drills, she watched them. The way their hands fumbled at first, then found surer paths. The way their shoulders slowly lowered as confidence crept in. Around midday, a car crunched over the gravel outside. Rachel glanced through the open door. A familiar sedan pulled into the makeshift lot. Adrian stepped out, taking in the building with a slow turn of his head. His hair was more gray now. The lines around his mouth had softened, carved by something other than scorn. He wore no white coat. A simple shirt sleeves rolled and a tired pair of shoes. She went back to the group. "We are going to break for lunch," she said. "There is water and something that calls itself food in the cooler. Be back in 30 minutes. The students drifted toward the back of the room. Sandwiches appeared from paper bags. Someone opened the cooler and the sound of ice shifting filled the pause. Adrian waited just inside the doorway until the cluster thinned. Then he approached. "This is not an emergency department, Yishe," he said by way of greeting. "That is very observant," she said. He looked up at the rafters, at the exposed beams, and the old pulley that once hoisted hay bales. The light from the high windows painted dust motes in the air. "You traded a level 1 trauma center for a barn," he said. "I traded fluorescent lights for sunlight," she said. "The coffee is worse." "I doubt that, he said. He stepped closer to one of the practice dummies, touched the fake vinyl skin with the back of his hand. "They listen to you," he said. "They listen because they are the ones who are going to be there when something goes wrong," she replied. "I'm just here on Saturdays." He smiled, then let it fade. "I retired last month, he said. "Officially, they gave me a plaque." "Useful item, Duktim," she said. "It is very heavy, he said. I did not know what to do with that, so I started writing." She raised an eyebrow. "A book," he said. "About leadership? About the way we train doctors to think they are more important than the people they serve. I wanted to ask if I could include parts of your story." Rachel considered him. The barn was quiet now, the students outside, on the grass, or sitting on the low wall near the parking area. "Will it help someone listen faster than you did?" she asked. "That is the hope," he said. Then you can use what you need, she said. Just remember, I was not the only one in those rooms. He nodded. They walked toward a corner where a wooden board hung on the wall. It was new, but already held a gravity that made people lower their voices when they stood near it. In memory of those who healed before they were believed, Adrian read aloud. Below the carved words, a list of names was burned into the wood. Medics, nurses, doctors. Some he recognized from news reports over the years. Some he did not recognize at all. You add to it, Kai, he said. Every year, she replied. Sometimes more often than that. His eyes shone, but he did not wipe them. Thank you for inviting me out here, Yea, he said. I did not, she said. You invited yourself. He laughed a quiet, genuine sound. Thank you for not sending me away then. You are good with your hands, she said. It would be wasteful. Later, when the last student had gone and the folding chairs were stacked against the wall, the barn settled into a different kind of silence. The light dipped toward evening, warm and slanted. Rachel stood at a deep sink near the back, washing her hands. The water ran cool over skin and scar. She rubbed at a faint streak of fake blood lingering near the base of her thumb until it vanished. She turned her wrist, watching the old shrapnel line catch the light. It was pale now, part of her no more separate than the bones underneath. Outside, a siren floated across the fields. Not close, not urgent to her, just a thin, rising and falling thread, carried from the highway. She closed her eyes for a moment and listened. Someone was having a very bad day out there. Someone else was driving toward them, lights flashing, hands on the wheel. They will have someone, she said softly to the sink, to the empty air, to whoever might be listening. On the workbench beside the sink lay a pair of surgical gloves neatly folded, and the gray patch she sometimes forgot to take off her hoodie. The white outline of a hand looked up at the ceiling. She turned off the tap. The last drop slid from her fingers and disappeared down the drain. When she walked back across the wide-open floor, her footsteps echoed once, then blended into the settling wood of the old barn and the distant sound of the siren fading into the evening. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.